Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Wayne State University. It's February 24th, and it's my pleasure to invite you to another session of Meet the Methodologist, and special greetings to those of us who are watching live on Facebook. And we're here today to have the opportunity to chat with two distinguished visitors who are here to give a CARMA webcast lecture later this afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome John Van Maanen from MIT and Ann Smith from the University of Tennessee.
Good to be here.
Yeah. And we're going to take a couple of minutes and just chat about their perspectives on research and careers and life and anything else that they want to throw into the mix. So I'd like to begin by asking just how you got interested in research methods. So we kind of alternate. You go first, and then you go first. So,
well, I obviously, as a graduate student, I don't think I would call it I was interested in methods per se, but I was intrigued by the adventure that fieldwork seemed to present, and I was bored to death with sort of conventional studies in the organizations area. So I had to convince a committee that I could go do field work, but I didn't have a clue what it would entail. And from that, and I never had a research methods class, so it was kind of sink or swim, which I think is in fact the best way to train field workers. It's not to say you go to the field without any idea of what you're looking for or trying to find, but so the interest in method came much later, and one could say it was an interest in method that was to justify what it is what I had done. So I had to find a rationale for it, and then that became, the quote method. We used the oxymoronic phrase participant observation in those days to convey field work.
How about you, Ann?
I think, well, I went to a pretty conventional U.S. school, had lots of quantitative courses. I did learn a lot of qualitative by being in the field. I always was intrigued by the stories after the story. So here you published your great empirical piece, and then sometimes you find in other journals, like, well, here's the backstory of how it really happened. I really love the piece by Dutton, where they talked about Dutton and Dukerich, how they actually did the eye in the mirror, and they were talking about that. So I've always been very intrigued by, here's the article that's been published in the top journal, but kind of pulling back the curtain saying, well, this is what happened on the backside. And I ended up writing about that as well, because I think it's a great conversation that we talk about in PhD seminars, but we don't write it up as much. So that's always been a real interest for me in research methods, is knowing the backstory about how it's really done, and learning about that. So I've enjoyed reading those pieces.
And so did you have a course or a process that helped you get the background knowledge in support of that objective?
I think when you have people teaching research methods courses who are research active, they will bring in a lot of that backstory. But I have even though I'm associated with qualitative methods, I think one of my favorite courses was taught at Chapel Hill by Ken Boland, who taught me Lizerl, because he could make something that was seemingly complex so simple. But he also gave tremendous feedback on how do you actually express this and write it up, and talked about the conventions of how do you express it. So I still have the notes that he wrote from my homework because it was so meaningful to me. But just as somebody that I took Lizerl as well as categorical regression from him as well. But they're always, I think, that if you are with research active people, even in regular seminars, not just research seminars, and they're research active, they're going to tell you about the reality that never gets into the paper, or it's taken out by reviewers at some point.
Yeah, it reminds me, I have my notes from a measurement class I took from George Mornstedt in 1985. And in spite of like 4 or 5 moves in the meantime, which I've lost a lot of stuff, I've kept a hold of those. John, you mentioned not having a course, but kind of how did you go about the process then of developing the knowledge base that led to your subsequent work?
Trying to relate to what Ann was saying. I think that I mean, we had the experimental design courses, and we had research design courses, but there was nothing on field work. I was at University of California, Irvine in Social Science Program B, which was a SOCREL variant of anthropology, sociology, psychology, political science. It's now gone. You know, the program has now become disciplined. But I do remember taking some cognitive anthropology classes with Roy DeAndrade, and they had categorization schemes that struck me as pretty interesting. You know, it was multidimensional scaling, you know, and these were, you know, sort of quantitative anthropologists. There was a move in cognitive anthropology to do this kind of work, long since over the top. But those are courses that were quite interesting because it taught me the name of the game is categorization, and how do you develop categories out of nothing, and then how do you, in some sense, make sense of them theoretically, which is still sort of an issue. And I think a lot of field workers are sort of anti-theory to begin with, going in to particular fields because the theory seems, you know, either sterile and banal or non-existent. And so you go there to try to clarify or categorize and see what's going on.
Are there any challenges that you can remember?
Well,
that
the
were
challenge,
particularly
of course, is when
challenging
you get
about
back from the field and your advisor or your, you know, colleagues say, "Well, write it up." And you say, "What?" And then it begins. And that's the challenge, of course. Fieldwork is the great adventure, fun, away from everything. But, you know, textualizing, that's the name of the game.
Ann, do you remember anything about challenges as a grad student trying to get all this stuff straight in your head?
Oh yeah, all challenges. It was, I think it was challenging also because I don't remember anyone before me in the area that I was in at Chapel Hill doing a purely qualitative dissertation. And I think that said, I do remember in the field asking for some closed-ended questions on a 1 to 7 scale. Tell us. We had a few little scale items, didn't end up using it, but you know, to make that comfort level that it could connect back to something that I had extensive training on. But I think just challenging, it is the challenge, and one of the questions is, you know, what book spoke to you or who spoke to you. I think the big challenge is going from the massive data, you know, of all this data. I love being in the field, and then connecting it and making it into something that's not book length but article length. And the book that really spoke to me and the work that's really spoken to me is the book called Composing Qualitative Research by Golden, Biddle, and Locke. Because I think that is the big challenge. And I love there's one quote in that book that says, your reviewers can almost become like co-authors because they may see things in your data in connections to theory that you didn't see. And finally, when I laid out 3 sets of reviews and began to look at patterns across the reviews, it was like an aha moment that was mentioned in this book that, oh, that's really the better frame, or that's a more appropriate frame to make sense of the massive data. So I found that book really spoke to me in terms of getting me beyond sort of a blockage in my career that, yeah, you can do this, everybody struggles with it, and look at the different titles that have happened over the years with these very famous papers, and they've been framed a little bit differently. So that was something that really got me through. In fact, at UT, whenever we get a promotion, or they say you can select a book to put in the library, and they'll put a nameplate in the book saying this was chosen by Ann Smith, and that's the book that I chose, is because it was so meaningful to me at that point in my career.
Yeah.
Nice.
Did you have a book, John, that was influential for you then?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. Buford Junkers' book called Participant Observation, which was a series of lecture notes, University of Chicago, 1930s. And I'm reading this in the late 60s, early 70s, was influential. I'm not sure. I think what it was a justification for what I was doing, and sort of, you know, Junker could make it seem important. And I was very, very intrigued by Chicago School of Sociology. But I was at Irvine, University of California, Irvine. I was the very first PhD student. So there were no colleagues. There was a very young faculty, none of whom did field work. But I was really lucky. Jim March was there and was a supportive character in my story, but certainly didn't do field work. But in some sense I was lucky because my taste developed in a more eclectic fashion, and I think had it been developed around colleagues and a hot group or a set of people that were doing similar sorts of things. There is a book that I've found extraordinarily useful with students, Jim Spradley's book, The Ethnographic Interview, and there's a whole series of, before he died, tragically early, from Macalester College, that really wonderful pieces, undergraduates writing ethnographies, very terrific kind of step-by-step immersion into a field, how to manage the first of 10 interviews with one informant, the key informant strategies, that I think students have found, or at least my students have found very useful. But there's it's a cottage industry, and how to do field work, how to do qualitative work. I think most of it is worthless. You learn like a plumber learns, it's like, you do it. And then the real test, of course, is field work. Can be done, not easy. And if you're uncomfortable being around people who don't particularly want you around, then a nice career in economic sociology or experimental social psychology is made for you. But fieldwork's sort of the name of the game. Can you do it? But that's half the game, because you got to then figure out how are you going to textualize it at the end. And there's not a boilerplate.
Well, kind of mentioning that the review process, you both, because of your accomplishments, have considerable experience as a reviewer of qualitative research articles. And so I was wondering if you could comment on what you see as kind of the common shortcomings, or what advice would you offer to authors that are trying to publish that type of work?
Well, I try to encourage monographs as opposed to articles. Although monographs can be broken down. I mean, obviously, I think the name of the journal publishing game these days, and has always been, is to have some sort of analytic twist and angle and theoretical wrinkle that drives the story. So it's not the chronology, it's the sort of the twist you put on, and then a very selective rendering of the data that you've got. I think the flaw almost always is the theory side of it. Either not enough of it, or it's not comparative, or it doesn't, there's no straw man to, contrast what it is you think you found against what conventional wisdom might be. And that seems to be the tricky part. But that's also a matter of, historically, socially, politically, there are all sorts of contingencies there. These days, well, institutional theory is almost all macro, so if you could make a micro institutional theory argument, you got a good shot at cracking an organization science or an ASQ. These days, there's so many journals around that it seems to me, if you really want to get a piece out, as we were talking about earlier, there's plenty of places that'll take it. Count and classify standards on which we work and which tenure is granted of having so many tier 1, tier 2 articles is really dysfunctional. I've always tried to tell my students, and maybe it's bad advice, just get it out. Get it out. I've published everywhere. My first pieces were in Human Organization, which was here, Applied Anthropology, Journal of Contemporary Ethnography. They're not going to count on a typical management school's list of the AMJs or FT list, but I'm getting it out. And eventually I'll get other stuff in other places too. But I, you know, it's I mean, it sound like you know, bitter old man here. The decline of the monograph, I think, is hits us pretty hard. At least in the ethnographic tradition. In other qualitative traditions, maybe not so hard.
Anne, how about you?
I will say the more I review, probably the better I get at managing my own research, because I do see there are certain paths that articles go down that are similar. I mean, many times they're just exceedingly long, and what's the point, or what's the real nugget there? And that's what I try to find when I review, because having gotten lots of different reviews in my life, I really try to figure out what is there in there that I as a reviewer can help them focus on. That I think is really the takeaway here, and help them hone towards that. I think that's one of the things that I find in my own
It's a good point. It's the sort of tedious nature of I've got to shove it all in here. But some of our most famous pieces, Don Roy's Banana Time, is a classic example. I mean, it's 6 pages long, and it's lived a life of 50 years. I mean, it's probably one of the most cited pieces ever done. It's theoretically, you know, sharp and cute, and it's descriptively rich, and it tells a wonderful, wonderful story. And it's very short.
And it's concise.
Yeah.
I've also heard that some very famous pieces that have been published in top journals were submitted together, and that at a certain point they had to be broken up into a couple of different. And I think that's what a great associate editor and reviewers will help you do, is to get to the point of, okay, this is the message in this paper, and this is the message in another paper. And I try to do that with my own writing as well, because it's easy to try to put everything in one fell swoop. I would say also, as a reviewer, I try to be developmental. I've gotten enough tough reviews in my life that I'm like, yeah, did you really need to say that? But just to try to help them move it forward in a way that's very productive.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you know that as we have sitting around the room, doctoral students are a very important audience for what CARMA does, and I was wondering if you have any advice that you would like to offer doctoral students that might help them have success as they pursue their research and their careers.
Keep on trucking. I mean, a long, hard slog. It's just a long, hard slog. No, stay with it. I mean, stay with it. And there's so many discouraging moments, in that process, from the generals to the proposal to the defense to the writing, and all writing is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. Persistence, be stubborn.
Okay. Anne?
Just keep writing. We have great doctoral students at University of Tennessee, and I think the encouragement is that I think be eclectic as well. Don't just have one tool that you use all the time, but being eclectic and learning about, you may never do a qualitative field study, but being open to that and supportive of that and learning about it, I think is very important. That's what grad school is for, I think, is to learn the breadth of the different tools that are available. And so I think I'm with you. Just keep writing. I remember one of your former students told me when I would get reviews or discouraged, just keep writing. Just keep writing. And I think that's a great piece of advice for doctoral students and faculty.
Could you, as I mentioned in the introduction, you're here to give a CARMA webcast lecture. Could you tell us a little bit about your lecture, Anne?
Okay. Well, mine is about using photographs to elicit data in the field. I think it's an embryonic area that we see it a lot in anthropology and sociology that really hasn't filtered yet into organizational research. So that's the gist of my talk. Where this interest came from, I have a funny story. Is I didn't have a lot of qualitative background. So when I was doing my dissertation, I used to put pieces of paper up on my wall in my apartment. You'll see a picture of that at the web seminar. And I started taking pictures of it. I don't know why I did, but I took it just to show that I did the hard research. I was actually doing the analysis. And I remember going for a job interview at the University of New Mexico, and I was going through my little PowerPoint presentation. I said, oh, by the way, I have these photographs of what I was doing. Well, the whole presentation stopped, everybody wanted to look at the photographs. That was years and years ago, and I think it was a latent interest that came out, and now I'm actually building on that.
Okay. John?
I'm here to sort of pitch my book.
And the name of that book
The name is
is?
Tales of the Field. The talk is more Tales of the Field. But the original Tales published 20 plus years ago, and I just did a second edition with a long epilogue that tries to say what's happened in ethnography over the last 20 years since Tales was published, and sort of where I was right, where I was wrong, where there's prophecy, admonition in this as well, and where I sort of see that work going that I couldn't and didn't certainly see in 1988.
Yeah. One of the things that's a treat in my position is to get to the opportunity to chat with people from such diverse backgrounds and interests, and I'm always curious as to things that they do to draw inspiration or motivation for your work, and I was wondering if anything comes to mind with that particular question.
For me, it's the people in the field. I just enjoy that so much and hear their voices when I'm writing as well. That's where I draw my inspiration, is from the people I've met in the field.
John?
I run a lot. Which I suppose is an outlet of some sort. Novels. I read a lot of novels. Read a lot outside the field. Art. I mean, a number of things, and certainly the people in the field who I don't get to see enough. Most of our colleagues are colleagues in an invisible college that they're located all in every far-flung spot. Yeah, I suppose that, and then actually getting stuff on a page and seeing it there.
Okay, last question then. What do you like the most and what do you like the least about what you do with your work?
I didn't have a good answer to this.
Yeah, I didn't have a good answer.
There's no good or bad.
I guess, I think just having more time. I think that right now is my big challenge, is just having time to, I tend to not be a person that can compartmentalize during a day. I need whole days of, okay, this is a day when I get to do research. So there are accounts of where you can write an hour every day, and I think I've heard that from a lot of very productive scholars. I think that's great. I like to have wide open days. I think my frustration is when I have distractions during my research day. Would probably be something I don't like as much.
And the longer you stay in this work, the more distractions there are. More teaching, more committee work, more university work, more service work. You're in the Garden of Eden, graduate students. And I look, and it's pure nostalgia, and because I'm sure at the time I didn't feel that way, but to be able to get up in the morning and organize a day around your research is a phenomenally rare occasion. And I think what I like the best is when I have days like that. What I like the worst is when my day is scheduled in 20-minute increments and has nothing to do with the work that I'm doing. But nonetheless, in some sense it does, but departmental stuff. And that's what I like the least about it, but it is necessary to continue the other side of the work.
Well, that includes what I'm sure are many invitations to travel and give talks, and so we are greatly.
This is a pleasure.
Yes,
this is a pleasure. We should talk about our work.
Well, we're thankful.
Not about the number of slots we're going to get next year.
Yeah. Well, it is time away, and we appreciate that, and we're looking forward to their webcast lectures this afternoon, and hope that you'll be able to join us. So, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep. Enjoy the rest of your day.